Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 112, and since I announced what was going to be this episode's album pick, that of course was announced at the end of episode number 111, which was last week's. It was of course a feature on Shock Tactics, the third album from Samson. At the end of that video, I did announce again it was going to be this episode's album of the week, and here we are. It is none other than, well, since I pretty much had focused on at least some of the more recent material from this band, being again from 2001's Plenty of Power to then 2011's Juggernaut of Justice, I obviously knew that eventually I was going to have to go backwards to the beginning of this band's career, to the very first record. It is the debut from Anvil. It is Hard and Heavy, which was originally released on May 25th. Yes, funny thing is, that's actually going to be tomorrow. Yes, May 25th is going to be tomorrow, and this was originally released in 1981 for May 25th. So, 40 years is pretty much embarking on its 40th anniversary. However, though, this is actually not the first time that this album was released. It was originally released a few months earlier under a different name, actually, even though it was the album title stayed the same again, Hard and Heavy, but the band name was different. And I'll eventually will get into that, because of this is where I guess in many ways we're gonna have to go into the beginning of Anvil. I know some of this might have been already mentioned in, of course, the story of Anvil, which again, if you hadn't seen that film, then I guess in some cases this is going to be a little bit of a repetition, but for some who might have not seen it, I'm going to try and briefly run through, of course, the beginnings of Anvil, of how they formed and how this whole name even began. So let's definitely go all the way back to 1973, where again Steve Kudlow and Rob Reiner pretty much had started to play together in 1973 under a band called Gravestone, along with a friend named Marty Hoffman. Again, he was the second guitar player, though it's not really credited on who was the bass player, but maybe you could probably make some guesses. But again, they were calling themselves Gravestone. Again, Steve Kudlow, Rob Reiner, and Marty Hoffman. Again, though, not to be confused with the Gravestone from Germany. But they named them that, but over some time, as the years went by, obviously the musical differences between both Reiner and Kudlow was differing between Hoffman. They just weren't seeing eye to eye, and eventually Marty Hoffman pretty much broke away from Steve Kudlow and Rob Reiner. And then pretty much by 1978, obviously getting together with, of course, Ian Dixon and Dave Allison, they were formed Lips, and that was all the way back in 1978, and they were definitely were playing some shows under the Lips name, and pretty much by 1980, from at least July to December, they pretty much get booked into Quest Recording Studios in Oshawa, Canada. Hope I pronounced it. Was it Oshawa or Oshawa? For obviously, I don't want to try and butcher that, but again, I don't know what's the best pronunciation for the town or the city of that part of Canada. But they get booked in Quest Recording Studios, and they were there from at least July to December of 1980 to record their debut full-length album titled Hard and Heavy. And of course, it was all produced by, again, Dave Allison, Rob Reiner, and Steve Kudlow, with, of course, engineer being Paul LaChapelle. Again, though at times he gets credited as being the producer, though, which is weird, but he's actually the engineer, of course. Again, he would then later on producing one of the more later period albums in the late 80s. Still, he's the engineer, and so that's again just working on the album, and that's about it. After that, it's not really been stated on what year the band Lips here, which formerly will then be known as Anvil. It's not really been specified on what month they had released it under the Lip. They had released Hard and Heavy under the Lips name. But I'm going to take a guess it was at least sometime between late January, early February that it had to have been released in 1981. So that's what happens. But then sometime at least they obviously the attention, and also it's not really been specified at least how many copies was pressed, because again it is a very hard to find copy. Though I only know that Scott Waters was able, apparently had somebody actually had sent him a copy, an original pressing of Hard and Heavy under the Lips name. Again, and it's a very rare record to come by. So, and again, it was also released through Splash Records, which again was their own label. So it was self-released, but obviously with this, it gained the attention of Attic Records, and that's when they decided to change their name to Anvil. I think because there was another band at the time under the name Lips. I think it was like a disco band, and they didn't want to be confused with them, so they changed it to Anvil, and they changed up their look because of, if you look at also the back cover for at least the original pressing of Hard and Heavy that was released under the Lips name, it looked like a glam rock band. So they had to somewhat change up their look, at least to kind of set them apart again to kind of almost put them in the sort of heavy metal sort of spectrum. Again, to be almost on the same level as some of those bands. They really want to look like some of those bands. So again, to really gain more of the attention. So that's where everything just comes into place. Attic Records pretty much picks up their first record and then pretty much repackages it in May 25th under the Anvil name with new artwork and yada yada yada. So from here, let's definitely get into Hard and Heavy, the debut album from Lips/Anvil. So let's get into it. Okay, so for this album, we have about at least 10 songs here, and it all clocks in at 41 minutes and 7 seconds. So these 10 songs are School of, AC/DC, At the Apartment, I Want You Both, With Me, Bedroom Game, Ooh Baby, their cover of the Rolling Stones' Paint It Black, Oh Jane, Hot Child, and then finally ending it with Bondage. Yes, you can tell already from the beginning that what the themes are for their lyrics, and it became a theme throughout pretty much most of their albums. I guess in some cases they still flirt with those themes to this day, though not as much though. And I don't want to try and get into that. I already kind of at least knocked a little bit of that anyways on my review for Juggernaut of Justice. Still, there you go. There's your 10 songs. And for those who might have discovered Anvil on, let's say, albums such as either Metal on Metal or Forged in Fire, or even at times maybe with the Backwaxed record that Attic released to kind of, I don't know, to try and hold on to the name of Anvil, kind of the way Gold Records kind of did with Judas Priest. Still, they did the same thing with Anvil, and again, anyone who probably might have discovered the Anvil on any of those albums, or even Strength of Steel or Pound for Pound, and wanted to kind of go backwards, this album, while in some cases you definitely do get that straight up classic Anvil sound, but at the same time, it's not nearly as like heavy as Metal on Metal, or nearly as fast and aggressive as like Forged in Fire or even Pound for Pound or any of the more later albums that came out in the 1990s. This was a much more different sounding record, and I think it's a sound that I think they definitely have been going somewhat revisiting on the more recent albums in some cases, especially on like Juggernaut of Justice, and even on Pounding the Pavement in some cases. They really definitely go back and try and revisit this sound because of what you get on this album for the most part, with songs like either School of, even At the Apartment, I Want You Both With Me, even Ooh Baby, Oh Jane, and even Bondage. It's got a straight up 70s hard rock sound that's definitely being just pretty much electrified on this album. It just amplified on here. You can hear the influences from like either April Wine and Moxie, and here and there maybe even the Guess Who in some places too. You definitely get even maybe Bachman Turner Overdrive and maybe Early Rush. You definitely get that sort of straight up 70s Canadian hard rock sound. It's just that it's a lot more metallic sounding compared to those bands that released those albums in the 1970s. It's that sort of bridge between the 70s hard rock and the sort of really growing herd of the 80s heavy metal sound. It's like sort of again that beginning, like some of the really early Riot albums, like for example like Rock City or Narita and Fire Down Under. You know, it's that sort of bridge between those three albums. It's definitely in that sort of same ballpark. It still has a bit of a 70s hard rock sound to this album, but again, even at times, even a little bit of glam rock, especially if you listen to like I Want You Both With Me, for example, and Oh Jane, which the song Oh Jane in many ways almost at times has a little bit of a Kiss influence on this one, but which again the riff, whole entire thing, even the sort of Ace Frehley style riffing here wouldn't have been far off on any of the first three Kiss albums. It's got that sort of same riff going on, that same sort of real feel, and it's cool. I actually kind of, again, it's not all trying to be, we have to be metal. This is still 1981. Again, even still during the time of the new wave of British heavy metal movement, who were definitely weren't, all those bands weren't completely heavy unless you were like Venom, for example, or Raven. You know, some of those were like some of the heaviest of the heaviest when it came to at least when it came to metal in 1981. But most of the time, it's just not all of it was still heavy, even though it still had that sort of attitude. It still was played hard, but it wasn't like completely, you know, what everyone expects now for what passes for metal these days. It's not, again, it's not like power metal. It's not like a straight up thrash or speed. It's just basically more what you would have expected from something from 1981 still. But it fits along it blends right in. And again, it's a little diverse in some places too. I know some will knock this album because of its somewhat lightweight nature in some cases, but that's because some people are expecting to be heavy, or expecting it to be at least it. But the thing is, the album title is Hard and Heavy. It's hard and heavy, and that's the best way you can describe this record. It's hard in places, but at times it can be heavy, especially with the song like Bedroom Game and Hot Child, even in some cases too, and even a bit of the stuff in the song Ooh Baby. It still has a heaviness to it. It's still, and of course it still fucking rocks, okay? It's just, you still got a metallic nature to this album. And of course I do like some of these songs anyways. It's just, it's at times some will just call this album straight up hard rock, but to me it still is heavy metal in many of the cases, especially 1981 circa heavy metal. It still does kind of have a little bit of punch to it, especially in a song like AC/DC and School Of are still rockers. The only one that might be closest to being really lightweight, but still has a heaviness, I still really like it, but a lot of people really tend to knock the album because of this one particular track, though, in some cases, that being At the Apartment, which is, again, more of a I wouldn't say a ballad, but it kind of comes close to being one, but it still is a very heavy track in its own way too. It's just a little slower. Again, very, I guess, similar to Stop Me off of Metal on Metal, but it still has a nice sort of atmosphere. It's got a nice groove to it. I don't know, there's something about that I don't know, I find to be one of the highlights off this album. I'm actually one of the few people that really dig the track. Again, what it is I like slower songs put in between some songs on the albums because of it actually, if anything, it's not, some say it breaks the flow of a record, but sometimes I think it actually adds a breather to it, to an album, because of not everything needs to be like at fucking 200 miles per hour on an album. I feel like sometimes you have to kind of take things back a little bit to kind of give the listener a little bit of a breather, because if you just let the listener just be completely just barraged with the whole bunch of straight up, you know, faster songs or whatnot, if anything, it can become very tiresome in some cases. I think slowing it down kind of makes it a little bit, again, it's a breather, because then when you do bring it back, it's put, let's say, a faster song after it, and all of a sudden, you actually, it flows better in that case to me, because now all of a sudden the listener is like, oh shit, it actually has a better impact. It really brings out a much more of a better punch in the end when you start pacing out, let's say, an album or its track listing in that sort of way. And I think adding a song like At the Apartment is fine, because again, it opens up with two hard rockers for sure, with School Love and AC/DC, and also the kind of mention School Love was one of the first singles off this album actually. So again, it is a very good classic track. So again, no complaints there. But again, you start up with two hard rockers, and it's just, again, having that then going into At the Apartment as number 3, it actually kind of, again, it actually keeps the flow of the album instead of breaking it. I just don't see that logic how adding a slower song in there breaks it, unless it's 2 or 3. I mean, I could probably can get if you got at least 2 really somewhat great, you know, I mean, I don't mind party style records in some cases, but at the same time, I think it's just great when you have that flow. But I guess if you were to say 2 really good songs and then go into like almost a complete whimper, which I don't know, I would not call At the Apartment a complete whimper, but it's much more melodic is what it is, and it just kind of, again, it keeps the flow of things instead of actually completely breaking it. I mean, it's not like they're going into a straight up, let's say, like, for example, Goodbye to Romance from Ozzy, which that I think was a little bit, you know, that one is right there, because it was what that might have been, I think, track number 3, and I could see why that would be a bad idea. And I mean, yes, it is considered a classic record, but the thing is, it just comes after 2 killer hard rockers, and it is. And the thing is, At the Apartment is a bit of a slower rocker, but again, it's got a groove to it, whereas something like Goodbye to Romance, putting it towards the end of the record would have been better. Whereas a song like this, I think it's perfect where it is to me. Again, probably because after many years of really spending time of listening to this album, I think it's fine where it is, and I think they chose fine where they put the track. But again, you got also like I Want You Both, which is more of a bit of a boogie kind of riff to it. Again, it's got that sort of feel to it, very 70s rocking feel to it. Again, that wouldn't have been out of place on, let's say, a typical sort of a glam rock record, even like April Wine, for example, as well. Again, it's got that feel. But then we got Bedroom Game, which is probably the closest you're really gonna get to a straight up speed metal track from Anvil, before, of course, taking it even a bit higher on like Metal on Metal, some songs like either Jackhammer and of course 666. Those really push the boundaries of just being fucking heavy and just being fast and aggressive. But Bedroom Game was like the precursor to those 2 songs off of Metal on Metal. It's like you really get the best idea on where they're gonna take things. So it is one of my favorite songs off the album. Of course, I have the Steel Crazy compilation at which this song was used for. It was actually, again, one of the first, I think, real major, I think, compilation albums that Anvil was put on earlier on, before, of course, some of the ones that Roadrunner would put out. But it's just a classic song, and again, it really fits in with the sort of new wave or British heavy metal movement, even if Anvil are Canadian. But the thing is, they are basically the new wave or British heavy metal band that came from Canada. That's the best way you can really can describe Anvil. But it's just, and the Sonic Bedroom Game fits that sort of example to a fucking T. It's a good track. Then Ooh Baby, which again, as cheesy of a title it is actually a heavy song in its own right. It's actually the only song that Anvil played when I saw them live about 2 years ago. So it was the only song, and it is a very good track, actually. I actually began really appreciating the song more when I played it live, because before it wasn't my favorite song on the album, but when they played it live, I think I just gained more of a straight up more of appreciation for this track. It's good. So again, great track. Again, 2 minutes and 56 seconds is probably the perfect length for a track like this, so I like it just fine. After that, they of course then follow it with, well, of course, this being again being part of the second half of this album, because the first half was definitely a good half, but I think the second half is easily just as good. Again, they're following it with their cover of the Rolling Stones' Painted Black, and they do actually a pretty good version. I think this is probably, of all the cover versions I've heard for this song, this is probably the first time I think it was ever played at this sort of this level of intensity in some cases, because of this is it. They really turned this track into a straight up headbanger. It's a lot faster. It still has a nice sort of atmosphere to it, but it still is very galloping. Again, I never really realized how much of a galloping sort of riff this track had when I heard Anvil play it, because before then it was a little bit more folky almost, I think, when I first heard this track Painted Black, because again, for a song from the 1960s, it sounded 60s, but when Anvil does it, it sounds absolutely 1980s. It's again probably the closest to when Judas Priest took, for example, like Diamonds and Rust. Anvil does, I feel, did the same with Painted Black here. It's got that same atmosphere to it, and it's just a freaking great cover. I think it's actually one of the biggest highlights for me on this album is their cover of Painted Black. They just did a fine job with it. So, just a good cover. And of course, getting into, of course, like I stated, Oh Jane, which is definitely more of a Kiss-like rocker on the album. I almost thought it had a bit of a Black Sabbath feel, but the thing is, over time, it's got more of a Kiss feel. Again, it wouldn't have been too far off on an album like either Hotter Than Hell or the debut album, or even at times maybe even Dressed to Kill. Though I think it's a little heavier. I think it really fits more into place on something on like Hotter Than Hell. Just again, it is a very good track, and it actually it is one of two of the songs here where Dave Allison is actually the vocals on this song. He actually provides the vocals to this track, and of course the first track on the album he provides vocals to is I Want You Both With Me, which I failed to mention, but I feel like it's better than now to mention it than not mentioning it. So, and I think I've always heard some people say that he's one of the weakest parts of the band. That he was one of the weakest ones. Like, he just wasn't that great of a singer. And yet, he's not the most talented, but so was Ace Frehley. Ace Frehley wasn't the greatest fucking singer in the world, but the thing is, he got a lot of fame. And he still is considered one of the biggest members to still be part of, at least from Kiss. So, and Ace Frehley, again, was never the greatest singer, but he's got a shit ton of popularity, and you got a lot of people defending him. But Dave Allison, it's like, oh, he was a fucking terrible singer. He was there's a reason why he didn't stay in Anvil for the course of their entire career. I think it's absolute bullshit excuses. in my opinion. Again, he's not even a bad fucking singer. He's got, I think with some of the vocal effects, I think it kind of does somewhat, I guess, make up for his lack in terms of singing talent. I mean, even Lips as the perfect fucking singer. Well, the thing is, what they've got going here, though, for him is like, you know, the can't sing, don't care, it's only just rock and roll. That's the whole entire motto, and they fucking live up to it and embrace it. And I think in many ways it still is. I mean, of course, so that they call any of these guys terrible musicians or terrible fucking players or singers is a complete joke. But these guys in the band, I don't think would be on a list. If you were to ask me, wouldn't be on a list of terrible fucking singers. So, all right, I just had to kind of, I know I went on a little tangent on there, but I just wanted to kind of throw those little opinions in there. Still, Oh Jane's a good track. Hot Child's another fine sort of heavy rocker, really good, and again, I do kind of dig it. Finally, it ends with Bondage, which is pretty much, again, lyrics, yeah, it's what you expect. I mean, it's self-explanatory, but musically, most of the influences on this album, yeah, there's a lot of Canadian hard rock influences, but the thing is, at the same time, there's also that underlining Ted Nugent influence, but you really hear the fucking Ted Nugent influence on this track. Bondage is straight up, its riff is very much similar to Gonzo off of Double Live Gonzo. It's got the same sort of riff, and even to the point on this song where Lips is actually, it's probably the best I ever heard on really replicating the Ted Nugent sort of guitar antics and his entire attitude, and it's just his playing. He really replicates a lot of that, from the sounds, from making it a part of the guitar solo part. It's a straight up jammer. Again, it's almost at times probably the best fucking Ted Nugent track that Ted Nugent hadn't even fucking written. It's a good sort of jammer, and I think, again, this is one song I kind of wished they had played when I saw them, because this is one of those songs that is probably best when it's really played live. I think I wish there was a live version for this song, because it's just fantastic, and it's just an absolute rip-roaring rocker. Again, just a good song. So there you go. There is Hard and Heavy from Anvil. Again, just a classic debut album. I know some people don't consider this to be one of the best albums from Anvil, but over time, I've grown to really like this album to where I actually put it as one of my favorite albums from Anvil. This is, again, it's a solid album. Again, while to even say that that it's as good as like Metal on Metal or Forged in Fire, or even at times maybe some of the later albums, yeah, that might be a little blasphemous to say, but at the same time, I don't think it's deserving of being the weakest Anvil album, because I think there are far more weaker albums from Anvil than this one. Again, I'll still put this album heads and shoulders above Hope in Hell. I'll put this heads and shoulders above even fucking Legal at Last. I'll put this heads and shoulders above, at times, Anvil is Anvil. I'll put this one heads and shoulders above some of the albums from the 1990s and even some of the early 2000s. It's still a strong album in comparison, but it's not nearly as strong, let's say, compared to an album like Metal on Metal or Forged in Fire, or even at times I even Pound for Pound and Strength of Steel, and of course even Worth the Wait, I think, was a really good fucking album from them. And then, of course, going to like This Is 13 and Juggernaut of Justice, and even I like freaking Pounding the Pavement. But at the same time, I do kind of like this one maybe a little bit more than that one. But again, I think I like them equally. This is still a very solid album from Anvil, and I think it's definitely worthy of being considered one of their best albums. So I'm definitely one who defends Hard and Heavy. I think it's a solid record from beginning to end. So there we go. There it is. And after this album, well, Metal on Metal happens, and then Forged in Fire, and then, of course, the rest is history. So I don't have to really reiterate any more of that. So there we go. Of course, this is, again, part of the classic four-piece period of this band. Again, the lineup: Steve Lipskudo, Dave Allefson, Ian Dixon, and Rob Reiner. All fucking great players, I think, and they definitely have, again, a good fucking rhythm section too, so nothing bad here. Just a great album. So there we go. That's it. Hard and Heavy, reaching 40 years for this album. Again, 40 years. 40th anniversary. It is definitely, a great milestone in this band's career. Again, this is where everything began. This was the album that pretty much launched every bit of, or at least just really kick-started them into gear, and then Metal on Metal just, it cemented them. I feel like Metal on Metal, it cemented Anvil in the pantheons, at least of at least rock and metal. It did, but Hard and Heavy is where everything began for them. So it's definitely deserving of, at least of its reputation. I think it's definitely deserving of respect. It's a good album. So again, it reached its 40th anniversary. So at that, if you want to leave any comments, again, I do. Again, whether or not you were there when this album was released, and if you were there, what were your beginning thoughts of this band? What was your beginning thoughts of this album in general? Again, what's your nostalgic memories, I guess, of this album? Again, just your memories in general. If you have any sort of good or bad memories, you can leave them in the comments section below. But with that, but if you haven't heard this album, I feel like this is, as a album, or at least as part of this band's history, this is actually I feel like you probably should give it a listen, and maybe even if you're getting into Anvil, this might be a decent one. It gives you a good idea, at least what's going to come from them, even if it isn't the best representation of Anvil. It still has its place in history. It still has its place in time. But of course, Metal on Metal being their most classic record, and then Fortune Fire. But this one, I think, deserves some sort of recognition, and I feel you definitely should give this one a listen if you haven't heard it. So there we go. There it is. Hard and Heavy from Anvil. Alright, so that pretty much ends episode number 112 of Album of the Week. So from here, let's definitely get into, of course, what's going to be next week's Album of the Week pick, for which was going to be, again, my album pick for episode number 113. Well, I can tell you this. We're going to get heavy. Oh no, we're going to get really fucking heavy for next week's Album of the Week pick. It is going to be a feature on the third full-length album from British death metal band Bolt Thrower. It is War Master. Yes, I'm going to be covering that album next week for episode number 113 of Album of the Week. So if you're fans of Bolt Thrower and are fans of that album, definitely, I hope all of you are looking forward to that one. So with that, this is Heavy Thrash Shed saying I am out. And I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.